The governor lays out his plans for Arizona and puts forth a budget for 2016.
Part of a quality community is that you have good schools that have kids in a safe environment where they're learning the fundamentals, and then you're locking up bad guys and putting them away.
The speech, titled Arizona on the Rise, will the message resonate with the public?
I think this speech was absolutely up the middle. So it is designed to appeal to the masses, to the folks that are watching at home, that will catch a single soundbite.
Plus, a look at the governor's plan for funding the state this year. This is Arizona Week. Hello, and thanks for joining us. Governor Doug Ducey gave his State of the State address Monday in Phoenix, approximately a 40-minute speech laying out his plans for the year. Arizona Public Media's Christopher Conover was in Phoenix and filed this report.
The governor's State of the State address was called a view from 30,000 feet by Senate President Andy Biggs. Biggs says he's eager to see the details behind the broad ideas the governor spelled out this week in that speech.
He gave some kind of indication, some nods in there that they're going to reduce regulation, they're going to streamline things, they want to perhaps even eliminate some agencies or consolidate. Well, if you get savings from there, maybe you're redirecting that money, and I don't know that.
Ducey's budget proposal, which went to the legislature at week's end, brings some clarity to the generalities in his speech. The governor called for tax cuts and moving closer to eliminating the state income tax. But Biggs says he doesn't see that happening this year.
I don't see any, or don't have any intention right now as we sit here of trying to get that thing through. That's a pretty big rock to roll up the hill. So. But I think you can start laying some groundwork for it, at least talking to folks and building the coalition necessary. But to actually see a bill dropped, I'm not intending to do that.
Predictably, Democrats are cooler to Ducey's plans.
There were a lot of sections where he said a lot of applause lines. First responders, but nothing about them. Gabby Gifford, she won a bicycle race, but nothing about her gun control efforts. So there was a lot of talk and hitting hot buttons, but I didn't hear a lot of details about how he's actually going to put the money on the table and make it happen.
The state's 3 universities were singled out for praise by the governor, but Democrats want Ducey to put some action behind his words.
For him to say that our universities deserve our respect, he's going to have to back that up with money, and that means you're going to have to spend some. He cut them by $99 million just last year alone. It would be great if we could restore that and reinvest in what has been our original economic engine, our universities. Not to mention the community colleges that were cut off entirely in Pima and Maricopa County.
The one requirement for state lawmakers in their annual session is to pass a budget. The current surplus could make that even more contentious.
You know, sometimes it's harder to do a budget when there's extra money because everybody wants to spend. Everyone has their $1 or $2 million project that they think it's a small project and we should really do this for government. So sometimes it's actually more difficult to do a budget in a good fiscal year because a lot of people want to spend.
This is a legislative election year, and to some, the governor's speech was a reflection of that.
I think this speech was absolutely up the middle. So it is designed to appeal to the masses, to the folks that are watching at home, that will catch a single soundbite to restore some funding in the foster care system, stop some of the bleeding, perhaps, in that area. So I think those are priorities for voters regardless of party.
State lawmakers got down to work this week, mostly in committee meetings, with floor action getting underway in the coming weeks. I'm Christopher Conover for Arizona Week.
On Tuesday, Governor Ducey flew to Tucson to deliver the address before nearly 1,000 people at the Tucson Convention Center. The governor touched on everything from the economy to education and public safety. Here's my one-on-one interview with Governor Doug Ducey. Tell me about this border strike force. It's only been operating since September, but it seems to be doing really well.
Well, it's only started since September. We had a minimal investment, but it's had some great success. We've made 300 arrests, and these are the bad guys. These are the drug cartels. This is human trafficking. We have seized thousands of pounds of marijuana, methamphetamines, heroin. So we want to stay focused on stopping this coming over our border. We're beefing up the relationship with our border county sheriffs, putting those relationships in dollars from Department of Public Safety to law enforcement to get these good results.
When you first announced this border strike force, was there some pulling of teeth with some border sheriffs? Are they now on board? How's that working?
I think they're on board. We started in Cochise County with Sheriff Mark Daniels. Now we've talked to all the border sheriffs. We've listened to their concerns, what they need from us, what the resources that are necessary, and the communication they want with the Department of Public Safety. We spent a long time with them, and I'm excited about the possibilities we have for even better results here.
Some of what we're hearing is that the feds should be doing this and not the state. How do you respond to that?
The federal government has failed Arizona in so many ways, and so we're working with the feds on how we can improve that relationship, and we have turned the page. We're seeing some signs of attention and activity and investment. So what we want to do is collaborate with them where possible, but this is still about public safety for the citizens of Arizona. So this is my responsibility as governor, and we're embracing it.
How far do you envision this relationship going, though? Because there are estimated 4,000 Border Patrol agents along the southern border. If they can't do it, can the state really handle it?
What we'd like to do is work more closely with the border agents. We'd like to see the border agents more on offense, so to speak, than on defense. We think by the relationship that we're building, not only with the border sheriffs, but what DPS is demonstrating in terms of new resources, gives us an opportunity to take a fresh look at this border issue and how we protect our citizens.
Let's move on to education, a big talking point for you today, and of course in Phoenix. Arizona is doing well, but again, not where we'd like it to be.
Well, we're always going to want to be improving in public education. There's a number of things that are going on that I think are very exciting. One is Prop 123. This is a monumental, bipartisan, historic settlement to this lawsuit. It's going to put $3.5 billion in new money into K-12 education without raising taxes. Now it goes to the voters on May 17th, so I'm encouraging everyone to vote yes on Prop 123, and we can put these resources to our kids and to our teachers. At the same time, we're getting some good results. You know, the nation's scores on the national report card turned the wrong direction this past year, while Arizona's are improving. So the reforms that we've put in the past are starting to make a difference in the outcomes we're seeing inside our classrooms. Now let's give our parents and our teachers the resources they've been asking for.
You talk a lot about these waiting lists for the good public schools, but what about these public schools that are not at the same performing rate?
Well, these are all our kids, so we want to see good public schools expand, and we want to see schools that aren't getting it done to make improvements. Sometimes that's a change in management, sometimes that's a change in policy, but we'll be putting these resources to all our schools. What's important is not so much the amount of money we're putting in, and we're proud that there's going to be a significant investment, but that's being done so we get better results for our kids across the board, whether they're in a high poverty, low income area, or whether they're in the suburbs.
You talked very openly about the problem that we have with foster care in Arizona. 18,000 plus children. Where is the issue? Why is this happening?
We have these parents who are unfit to take care of their kids, and the state is in a position where they need to step up and make the difference. Now, this agency has been broken for years. You'll remember that it was the Department of Child Services, and now it's Department of Child Services, and before it was Child Protective Services. We've got a new director there. He's been in there nearly a year. There's been a lot of investment. We're seeing it start to turn the corner, but what I want is people to be aware. We're always going to have bad parents out there. I don't know if we have more bad parents today than when I was a kid, but there's always going to be kids that need help. They're in a vulnerable situation. It's only the state that can help them, but it's really adoptive and foster parents who make the difference. So I'm always calling on more people to help with these children. I'm calling for more court-appointed special advocates, and we want to do a better job as a state identifying these children, making sure there's safety for them, that there's a permanent relationship, and where possible, to reconnect them with a family or a family member.
How do you assure people, though, that these numbers will start to dip, because the numbers have kept climbing over the years?
The first thing is child safety. So when a kid is in harm's way, we want to protect them. If the objective was just to turn the numbers around, you'd have social workers walking past kids in danger. So we're seeing our economy turn, and oftentimes that means better decisions are being made. So we want to do two things, but there's not just one number we're going to focus on here. We want to protect these kids, reconnect them with their families, but the most important thing is to make sure they're in a safe situation.
We hear a lot, last week there was an education summit here at the Tucson Convention Center, and there's talks of the state putting more money in the justice system than there are in education. Where's that balance?
Well, the first thing is we want to educate our kids and we want to see better results. The second thing is we're always going to talk about public safety. I mean, we're going to put bad guys away in prison. Now, we're making some changes when we can work with somebody because the issue is more drug-related or around addiction, where we can get them in community care facilities, where we can work with rehabilitation and experts around that. But we can do both, and I think part of a quality community is that you have good schools that have kids in a safe environment where they're learning the fundamentals, and then you're locking up bad guys and putting them away.
You had a tough message for some deadbeat dads, as you have hashtagged them.
Well, I think that people, fathers that have a child, have a financial responsibility for that child. There's over $1 billion, or nearly $1 billion, in outstanding money owed to these mothers. I want to see it paid, and we're going to use social media to make that happen.
You talk about these rape kits and there's a backlog. Who's responsible for this backlog?
This backlog has been at the city and the county level. We've identified it. We've put together a special task force, and we're going to bring resources to it. The problem is with an uninvestigated rape kit is that there's a predator out there that has not been identified. Once we clear these backlogs, we'll have the proper information so that when we catch these people, we can prosecute them.
One sheriff we rode around with recently said that DPS might want to handle those cases instead of being on the border. How do you respond to that?
Well, we want to work with our local law enforcement. We want to work with our sheriffs so we have communication. I wish there were fewer bad guys, but there's enough business to go around that we want to work with them, that whoever's best to do the investigation, to do the law enforcement, and where there's backup and support needed, that's where the state wants to be.
You boast a surplus, a pretty good one.
Now, I don't boast a surplus. I talk about a responsible budget that has produced a cash carry forward. So we're in a totally different position today than we were a year ago. We were $1 billion in the red. Today we have somewhere around $322 million in what I call a cash carry forward, because some of it is in one-time funds. So we are going to invest in the state of Arizona going forward, but we're not going to be reckless or throw money around. We want to be responsible so that we make sure that we're not digging in the same hole we just dug out of.
The JLBC has said, let's be careful with how we spend this money moving forward. They're the money guys. You were a treasurer. You understand this. So where do you find that balance of saying we don't spend the money here, but we do here? Where do you say the resources belong?
I think it's around values-based budgeting. What do we prioritize in the state? And we know that it's public safety. We know it's education. We know it's child safety. We want to put resources in these places first and make sure we're making good decisions for the long term and then measuring results.
The economy seems very strong. Education is improving. Sounds like great opportunity in Arizona. But the cynics are undoubtedly out there and will say that it's not.
Well, I'm optimistic. I mean, when you have 56,000 new jobs and Forbes is saying you're the best state in the country for future job growth, and we're seeing 100,000 people in the most mobile country in the world move to our state, it says we're doing a lot of things right. It almost reminds you of the good old days that really weren't that long ago. We're still the same state with the same great qualities, maybe a little more affordable to people that want to come here from California or other parts of the country. So what I want to do is maximize that through our messaging, through our marketing, through our promotion, through our tourism and commerce agencies, and grow again as a state for the prosperity of all our citizens.
Governor, thank you. Any other thoughts you'd like to add?
Just thanks for having me. It's January of the new year, and we're excited for what's possible here in the state of Arizona.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
The Tucson Metro Chamber works with more than 1,400 businesses in southern Arizona. Its efforts include promoting the local economy and supporting business development in the region. The Tucson Metro Chamber hosted Governor Ducey on Tuesday, and though was pleased with his message, acknowledged there's still work to be done when it comes to growing the state. Robert Medler, the Vice President of Government Affairs from the Tucson Metro Chamber, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
The governor talks a lot about the economy in Arizona, how healthy the picture is. What's it like in southern Arizona?
Southern Arizona is doing okay on the economy. We have grown slower in the last year than the rest of the state, and especially the metropolitan area of Phoenix, but we've still seen some growth here in southern Arizona, so that's a positive.
What do you attribute that slow growth to?
One, I think it's just Phoenix is a larger market, so I think inherently people are going to be drawn to larger markets. Also, southern Arizona, unfortunately, still has a rap of not being a place where people can come and start a business. That's something the chamber, along with a lot of elected officials, are working on changing and trying to attract new businesses here. This is a place where you can come, move to, start a business, operate your business, grow your business. So that's one of our priorities this year.
What are some of the complaints that you hear from businesses who try to start up in this area?
One, probably the biggest, is qualified workforce, especially if they're taking a small business that may be family run and they're trying to grow it and they're looking for that fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh hire, whatever the case may be. They're not being able to find the qualified workforce. Now that's hard to define because qualified workforce means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But really I think you have to look at what the product is coming out of our school districts of, do they have the math skills, the language skills, the STEM criteria that a lot of these smaller companies that work in either IT, intellectual property, engineering, manufacturing. I mean, manufacturing today is not what it was for our parents and grandparents.
So where is that disconnect between maybe the school system and these small businesses, what they need and what they expect in a workforce when they come here?
I think the disconnect is probably not knowing. I think this is one of the classic cases of just absolute miscommunication, that the business community has not been able to communicate effectively to the school districts to say, here's what we need from graduates, but then the school districts are so focused on trying to get students through the pipeline to meet the standards that they have to, they don't have the time or the inclination to go out and ask the business community, is the product we're creating what you need? And I think there's just been a disconnect there for probably decades now on that.
What are some of the things the Chamber does to try and rectify that?
We're working with the school district, especially Tucson Unified School District, to get business owners in the room and talk to them. In Tucson, we have a large dropout population, so I know the mayor has done a good job spearheading that, going around asking students why they aren't at school that day and trying to get them re-engaged back. As a community, that's probably the biggest thing we do, getting kids back into the classroom and finding out what their interests are. Get them into classes, elective classes that will engage them mentally. Everyone remembers school, the classes you loved and classes you hated. If it's something you're interested in, it's probably a class you did the best in. We need to find what those are for those students and get them in those classes, and that'll give them at least a better shot at graduating.
Economically, the picture you described is strong, but where do we need to be? Where is it headed, given the timeline?
Well, where it needs to be, I think, as a Chamber of Commerce, is we'll say the sky's the limit. I mean, we want to see the economy grow and grow and grow and grow. We need to find a better way of helping the businesses that are here that want to stay. And I think that's some of the things, as policies you look at the federal, state, and local level. What type of climate are we setting for businesses who want to stay? Are we having kind of the arms wide open, door open approach, welcoming them into our community and asking them to stay, and maybe bending over backwards a little bit to make sure that they do stay? And every business has a different need, and so it's really going out and asking them.
We've talked about this with the Chamber before. I mean, there are little things like the roads that maybe discourage someone from coming to this community. Where is the Chamber working with maybe the city or the county, the transportation authority, on fixing these things?
Well, I mean, as you noted, for 2 years now, we've been saying roads is the #1 priority. We did our own survey, the Business Expansion and Retention Survey. That was the #1 concern business owners had, was the roads. And I think that just goes to first impressions and community pride. We worked with the city a few years ago with getting the $100 million for the roads. That program has been an immense success. I'm sure you've talked to the mayor about it, and they squeezed out almost another $40 million, if I remember right, out of that original 100. That's a great bang for your buck, and a program that I think people, citizens, whether they're city residents or just in the metropolitan area, have seen the difference. I mean, the roads in Tucson, the major corridors that have been redone, are excellent. They're smooth roads, and so I think the city is on the right track. They still have a few $100 million in needs, but a lot of that gets away from the main corridors and into the neighborhood roads. And so finding a long-term plan of how to manage that is going to be the next step. And hopefully the new city manager, Mike Ortega, and the mayor and the rest of the council will be able to formulate a plan after this budget cycle. With the county, with the bonds being defeated, I think that is where collectively as a region we're going to have to come together and find out what is the best mechanism to set up. Hopefully with the state having excess revenues, or increased revenue I should say, than they were expecting, they won't have to dip into HERF funds this year. They'll be able to fund DPS out of another mechanism, and then that will help more funds come through the HERF distribution. So that's really the first step, I think. After that, the county's going to have to figure out what they can take back to the residents. It's hard. Marana has a plan, Oro Valley has a plan, Sahuarita has a plan to deal with their roads, and I think that was one of the things that came out of the bond, is residents in those cities, or I'm sorry, towns, said, my roads are fine, why should I be paying a property tax to cover it? And that's the hard thing, is it's hard to go and tell someone that the gas tax hasn't been raised since 1993, and it's only worth 40 cents on the dollar because of the more fuel efficient vehicles, and the cost of supplies has gone up.
The Buzz now, and I'm joined by Mike Sonnix, senior writer up at the Phoenix Business Journal in Phoenix, and Mike joins us from our affiliate KAET in the Phoenix area. Mike, thanks so much for your time today. You've seen the budget now, slightly more money than last year at about $9.3 billion. What are your thoughts?
Well, we have a surplus. I mean, the revenues have been coming in pretty well. Last year, the Ducey and the Republicans, made a number of cuts, and so this year we're seeing some increases to some certain areas. We're still waiting to see some details on, maybe if there's any new tax cuts in there. He's keeping the existing tax cuts that have been coming in. But we're seeing a few increases like to universities and education and Department of Child Safety. I think they're going to put $10 million in the rainy day fund. So kind of a modest growth, even though we're seeing kind of some robust surplus numbers, at least for the next couple of years.
In an interview with the governor, he's hesitant to use the word surplus. What's really the semantics behind that?
Well, I think the Republicans, especially on the Senate side with Andy Biggs, is they want to temper calls for a lot more spending on education and social welfare programs. Universities that have been cut in the past. I think you see a lot of folks, from the Democratic side and the business community and school advocates saying, well, look, we got all this money. Look at all this money coming in. Let's put it towards programs. Let's put it towards boosting our per pupil spending numbers. Let's recapture some of those cuts that happened last year to state universities. And so I think they use these semantical arguments on surpluses and structural deficits to try to temper the spending advocates to say, well, we really don't have this much money. There's really not this pot of gold out there to allocate towards things.
In this budget proposal, we see for education about $106 million, and then we also are anticipating the $3.5 billion come May. I think when you run all the numbers, it still amounts to about maybe $300, $400 more for students in Arizona, which leaves us...
I think the governor...
Go on ahead,
I think the governor is very sensitive to this. A lot of the polling after the last budget that came out, there's a lot of frustration among independents, among moderates, among Republican women voters about where we rank in terms of per pupil spending, how much we spend on K-12, how much we spend on higher education, and how we lag the rest of the country. I think you see a lot of folks in the business community cite those worries, and I think the governor is sensitive and aware of those concerns. And so you see him trying to address these things. First it was in the lawsuit negotiations between the legislature and the K-12 folks, settling that. The state trust land proposal that he has to boost education funding, at least for, I guess, a decade. And now in this, at least it's it might not be a huge number, but at least I think he sees the tea leaves out there politically for himself and for the state's efforts to draw companies here and to retain college students and those types of things. We need to have, I think a lot of people argue we need to spend more on education. So I do think the governor is kind of on board with those. He's just got to weigh that against the fiscal conservatives in his party and down at the state capitol that he has to pass a budget with.
And he made no bones about public safety in his State of the State, and here we see $31.5 million or so for the Border Strike Force. Is he going to have some trouble with the legislators in pushing that argument that it's needed?
We'll see. I think, the problem that you have with spending down there is usually on the left side of the ledger, social service programs, higher education sometimes because of some of the relations with the universities over the years. There's still plenty of border hawks in the Republican caucus and at the district level. And so, immigration has kind of popped up in the presidential race, with Donald Trump bringing it up. So I don't know if there's going to be a problem with that as much. Immigration may not be the hot button issue on the ground here in Arizona that's been in the past, but I think nationally it is there. And this governor's very aware of national politics. He wants to probably run for office beyond governor. And so a lot of the things he's doing and the messaging he's doing and the priorities he has, that's kind of a backdrop for that sometimes. And so I think there could be more than enough Republicans down there in both chambers to pass something like that. The state's got a big surplus, and 31 million. Does that seem like a big number? Maybe not.
And let's talk about the economy. Tax cuts not necessarily very easy to find in this budget proposal, but it looks like a generated revenue would be down almost 9%, which indicates if businesses keep growing, then there are some tax cuts coming.
Yeah, that's the expectation. That's kind of the shoe everybody's waiting to drop. Is this governor has talked about cutting taxes, reducing taxes every year in office. He'd like to get, income taxes, down or close to zero. He's talked about that. He certainly showed support last year when we had a less friendly fiscal picture to some of the business-backed tax cuts that were passed during Governor Brewer's tenure. And so he wants tax cuts along with some of the other priorities, such as education, to be his legacy. So people are expecting some kind of tax relief to come down the pike. Certainly wasn't promoted in some of the budget documents we've seen so far. Maybe somebody else will carry some of the water for that, but you'd think if there was going to be a major tax cut push in the budget, it would be highlighted, and we haven't seen that yet. So maybe they're waiting to do that as a separate measure. I would expect to see something. That's something he's really been promoting. He's modeled himself after tax-cutting governors Republicans across the country. So we should maybe see something on the corporate side, maybe see something more on the income side, or we'll see what happens.
All right. Mike Sunix from the Phoenix Business Journal, thank you so much for your analysis.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
That's our program. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, thank you for joining us.